Hi, and welcome to another coffee break with Formation. So, one of the common tips that I give about prepping for interviews is to not just silently cram LeetCode and to make sure you are practicing explaining your solutions out loud. And one of the easiest ways to do this is to simply practice with a friend. So since I've been giving this advice, I've been noticing that explaining a solution to a friend who has as much context on a problem as you do is quite different from explaining a solution to an interviewer who is deeply familiar with all of the common ways to solve a particular problem. With a friend, you may need to get into a lot more detail about how every loop works and walk through a lot more detailed step-by-step examples. But interviewers, they most likely have already given this problem tens or even hundreds of times, and they know all the different solutions. So when communicating with an interviewer, you often only need to explain the key insight to the solution so that they can identify which one you're talking about. And you won't need to go into nearly as much detail as when you're explaining the solution to a friend. So I guess as an example, one of the common problems that I like to give in interviews is print tree by level. I think it's possibly banned now because it's too common. But when I gave this problem a lot, there were 8 kind of most common solutions that people would come up with all the time when I gave this problem. And really all I need someone to say is, oh, I could use 2 queues, and I immediately know what solution they're talking about without any further explanation. And this is true for a lot of problems, and a lot of the more advanced data structures are like this. So for example, oftentimes the key insight you need to identify is simply to identify that you need to use a dictionary and identify which keys and which values will be in the dictionary. Sometimes the key insight is to simply identify that you need to use a heap or a trie in this problem. So I guess to go back to the original question of how do you practice this then, so I have one suggestion. So when studying your algorithms, try to, at the end of your practice, summarize your approach up into just one sentence, just that one key insight. And during your interviews, try to always start with that one sentence, most concise explanation of a solution that you have in mind, and let your interviewer decide how much detail they need to provide by prompting them to ask you questions. And by keeping these kind of explanations more concise, the advantage is during the interview, you can actually focus on the more interesting discussion of pros and cons of different approaches, as opposed to just explaining how one approach works. So that's it for today, and I will see you at the next coffee break with Formation.